Well, shall we start then? Good morning to everybody in Europe, and good afternoon if you're connecting from China or from other Asian countries. My name is Amadeo Genzana, and I'm the Economic and Business Director at Casa Asia. And welcome to this webinar about East and West, actually different perspectives on management. We have co-organized this activity between the International Federation of Scholarly Association of Management, the Scientific Association of Economics and Business Management, ACEDE, and Casa Asia. The institution that I represent, Casa Asia, belongs to the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs and is trying to foster different projects with Asian countries in different fields like culture, education, business. And actually for us, it's a great pleasure to count on the participation of four very important professors on management to try to explain to you actually what are the differences and also similarities between the management styles in the East and the West. So that's all from my side. And I would like to pass the floor to Luis Ángel Guerras, who is the president of ACEDE, the Scientific Association of Economics and Business Management. Mr. Luis Ángel Guerras, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning or afternoon to all the speakers and attendants to the webinar on East and West comparative perspectives on business management. It is a pleasure for me as the current president of ACEDE, Spanish Academy of Management. I was saying that it is a pleasure for me as the current president of ACEDE, Spanish Academy of Management, and Professor Carmen Cabello as the current vice president to participate in this activity. Thank you to Amadeo Genzana from Casa Asia and Xavier Castañer from IFSAN for the invitation. ACEDE, Spanish Academy of Management, is an academic organization of scholars in management, finance, and marketing, established in 1990, and I am proud to say that ACEDE is one of the founder members of IFSAN. After a period that ACEDE has been disconnected from IFSAN, last year we have rejoined the association, trying to be an active member. Our engagement with this webinar is a proof of it. We welcome this kind of initiatives that try to improve our knowledge on management issues and to build bridges between East and West. In my opinion, this is one of the key purposes of the mission of IFSAN. The topic of this webinar seems to be of great interest in a globalized world. International businesses are one of the key topics in management, and Professor Fidel León from University of Valencia and a member of ACEDE is one of the top academics in this area in our country. Thank you, Fidel, for your contribution. I am sure that all other speakers are going to contribute too with very interesting presentations. Then, congratulations to Casa Asia and IFSAN for organizing this webinar. I am sure that it is going to be of top interest for all the attendants and speakers. Thank you again to Amadeo and Xavier both for the initiative and the invitation to ACEDE, Spanish Academy of Management, for participating. I sincerely expect that it is only one of the many successful initiatives that ACEDE and IFSAN will be able to promote together in the next future. Enjoy the webinar. Good morning, afternoon, and good luck.
Well, thank you very much. And I would like to pass the floor to Xavier Castañer, President of IFSAN. Xavier, please.
Thank you so much, Amadeo. I'm really delighted to be here today to see this event go live. I would like to thank first Javier Parrondo, the Director General of Casa Asia, for having believed in the idea when we talked about it already quite a few months ago, and for Amadeo, who actually made it a reality with his tenacity and persistence. Obviously, big thanks also to ACEDE, to Luis Ángel Guerras, its president, and to Carmen Cabello, its vice president, for agreeing to participate also in this event. As Luis Angel said, this is an example of the kind of initiatives, synergistic initiatives that the Federation carries on. I would like to share briefly a presentation about the Federation, and I would like to say also that among the attendees, we have with us today also the Vice President for Conferences of IPSAM, Martin Spring, who will be spearheading this initiative. So the Federation is a body which was created 31 years ago. It's a non-profit association which is currently incorporated in Belgium, and it has currently 22 members, between full members and associate members, and 2 observer members. You can see here the geographical scope of the Federation, which has quite a few members from Asia, in Laos, in Nepal, in Japan, and broadly speaking, also in Asia. Obviously, today we have 2 panelists. Also, Yingshan Tang, who is a former representative of CAMS, the Chinese Academy of Management Science, and currently a member of the advisory board of the Federation, and Chongwei Saw, who is the president-elect of Cinema, and also member of our general representative as one of its representatives. So, what to say more about the Federation? In brief, that its purpose is to advance business and management research, teaching, and practice across the world. And as Luis Angel already said, this activity, I think, exemplifies pretty well many of the different objectives that the Federation has in terms of creating synergies among members of the Federation, in this case, ACEDE, but also, in a way, Cinema and CAMS, to promote linkages and exchanges of information and supporting the internationalization of our members. And this is an international activity, an international webinar that is devoted to explore and exchange ideas about management and the differences, as it was said by Amadeo and Luis Angel, between East and West parts of the world. So with this, we expect to also fulfill our purpose to have a contextualized perspective on management, education, research, and practice, in particular for this webinar, to recognize that in different parts of the world there are still cultural and institutional differences. And finally, through this activity, also to develop networks, contacts between academics interested in common topics. If you want more information about the Federation, please go to ipsam.org, when you can have information about our membership in more detail, soft policy statement on management research, our upcoming biannual conference, and we are also present in social media. Again, thank you so much to all of you for attending to this presentation. Xie. Muchas gracias de nuevo a Casa Asia y al Gobierno Español.
Well, thank you so much, Javier. So let's start with our 4 panelists today. I'm very glad to see actually there's a lot of people just connecting from different parts of the world. I'm seeing now from Taipei, also from the Canary Islands, from Andorra. So, and please, if you have just any question, you can just write out the chat. Okay, and later on we will have just some minutes at the end to answer the question. So I will start with Professor Yingshan Tang, who's Professor of Management Computing at Henley Business School. Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Amadeo. Good morning and good afternoon, depending whenever you are. My talk is trying to pick up the main points of different ways of managing between China or Chinese and the Western part of the world. I use the degree of freedom. However, before I go further, I'd like to make a statement saying Chinese and all the other people, we are all human beings. And in many parts, we are in common. And so when we're actually talking about West and the East, we tended to, focus on the differences. But I think we should at first to focus on the common things and the common grounds, and then later on go for the differences. The differences are only trying to stop us to making huge or further mistakes. So this is the basic information. However, when I talk about the degree of freedom, I like to separate them into three different categories. The very first one is at the strategic level, and the second is the cultural level, and the last one is really at the project delivery level. If you look at the Chinese on the way of thinking and also the way they behave or practice, I put three pluses here. So at the strategy level, the Chinese tend to be more relaxed. You do enjoy more freedom, and gradually when you to the project level, you tend to have less freedom. If you look at the British way, which I use as the representative of the Western part of the management practices, and I use more or less the similar sort of level of degree of freedom. The difference is, if you look at the strategic level, in the Chinese way, they actually tended to make decision rather quickly and swiftly at the in a situation where not many factors are crystal clear. And I use the example of for the COVID. So when we had the COVID, and the Chinese, they reacted very quickly, and also the decisions made based on all the factors they think they may be useful, so they just decide. And in the Chinese, there is a famous phrase is talking about you cross the river by touching the stone. And simply because they know that you have to cross the river, however, there is no way we know which one is the safe path. So the only method they do is trying to go one stone by another, one by another. This cartoon doesn't reflect the way what I'm trying to present. However, this is actually shows a sort of a synergy when you make a strategic decision, trying to focus on the overall direction where you're going, and then do a step by another, one follows another. And if you look at the British decision on COVID, I think they tended to wait until the scientific evidence. Whenever the scientific evidence is clear, then they started to make decision. When it is not clear, then tended to wait. So that's why I believe the British government waited for a long time before even they decided to use the face masks. And then at the cultural level, I have two separate categories. One is when you are managing a Chinese, and the second is when you are managed by a Chinese. That's slightly different way of thinking. However, when you are managed by a Chinese, and the Chinese, when they present their ideas, they tend to use a kind of blurred way. I use the word of more freedom. For example, if the Chinese came to ask you, can you do something for a couple of days? Can you do something for a couple of days? In the Chinese mindset, it's really talking about you can do it in 1 day, you can do it in 3 days. It doesn't matter whenever you finish, as long as you can finish in 3 days. But if you talk to a British, can you do it in a couple of days? And a couple means two. So you can see the precision in the British way of understanding is more accurate in a way. And I use the word they have less freedom. And then, sorry. In some of the cases, if you ask your staff to put down what they are doing at the moment, and then let them to do another task, and the Chinese, usually they always answer yes. So as long as you're the boss, you not ask them to do something else, put down what they're doing now, and they would say yes, and then they'll do it. However, they may not actually necessarily agree with you. So that is that one. However, for British, if they agree with you, they say yes, but if they don't, they may say, sorry, I'm busy, I'm doing these things. Can you wait until I finish? And you can see at the bottom of each of my slides, I'm trying to use a sort of question, why is so? Those are related to the philosophical explanations. Because I understand I only have 15 minutes, so I'll go through this quickly. So later, if someone got questions, and I would be happy to discuss this in the discussion time. And the third one is a common challenge for when you're actually managing people, you ask them to work overtime. So if you ask people to work overtime, and the Chinese, usually they would say yes. And although sometimes they actually really want you to say no, but because you are the boss, you said that, and they would say yes. And again, for British staff, they would actually answer yes or no, depends if they're happy with the job, what they are doing. And if you ask your staff to provide an honest review on you, and so be careful on this particular part, because the Chinese, they would only give you the positive ones. And they say the British do the same, but actually I can see the British is doing similar, but in the sense of degree. And I think the British is much less than the Chinese ones, because when you ask people, especially face to face, of their opinion, and they usually only give you the positive parts. They would give you the negative comments. However, they are not going to talk directly with the positive, negative comments. They tend to give you some signals. And the signals is usually embedded in within the language. If you understand the language, if you actually watch their body language, you might be able to understand they are actually saying some other things in there. So this is the fourth one. And for the fifth one, oh, by the way, all those things are actually through my work by observing the Chinese companies in the UK, and also for some of the British companies, they actually have subsidiaries in China. So here is a very interesting example. This is the real case. And that was the company, which is set up as subsidiaries in the UK. And during the weekend, a mother brought her 5-year-old daughter to come to work. And because the company has the policy to provide free lunch, so for the lunchtime, she took her daughter for lunch. When she took her daughter for lunch, and then she was spotted by some senior management members. So they virtually told her to take her child away, or she has to pay. So this actually made the things was very messy. And then you can see from this particular example, there are different ways of doing it, or trying to solve this problem. And the Chinese, usually they would say yes, because she came to work, especially during the weekends, with a 5-year-old child to have a lunch. It doesn't matter at all. However, if you follow the rules, and the rule says you only provide lunch for your employee, and then here you can see this place. This is the reason why the girl has been told off. And this particular event then actually forced the company to change their policies. And then obviously the things has been solved in a sort of manner, like a hybrid manner. And someone said, yes, no, you can't, you have to pay. And later some senior management members went to see the employee and gave her some sort of reward in a way, because she worked during the weekend. Then for the things they should actually is my real life cases, which I've seen many times. In the Chinese system, if you reach an agreement with the senior management team on the contract, and from the Chinese point of view, usually they would say 90% of the job is done, which is the real case. And then if you actually talk to a British people, British organization, and when the senior management team said, yes, this is a wonderful thing, we need to do it, and usually they regard that 90% of the work to be done. They only actually think it's 10% is done. Then we have these, we call it initial trusts. And the initial trust is the Chinese usually started very low and the British started very high. And when the time goes, and because the Chinese started very low, the only thing they would go is go up. And the British one is because it started very high, the only thing they can go is go very low, go lower. So you can see there's a cross. And at this point, if both parties agree to actually make a concession, and that probably means they have a window to reach an agreement. But when this passes, And it usually means the relationship and the trust between these two parties would go apart and go further apart. And if you look at the British and Chinese diplomatic relationship, I think we are getting here. We're getting further and further apart. I hope we can go back again sometime in the future. So when you are managed by Chinese, that means if your boss is a Chinese, and as your boss, the Chinese usually have different kind of expectations apart from the work, the job itself. And usually the Chinese would try to build a relationship first. So they put the personal relationship above the professional life. So that's why if you actually have a boss as a Chinese, they usually invite you out for quite a lot of different things. And like going out for a meal and team building activities and do all different sorts of social events. And then from the Chinese point of view, and they always put your organization and your contribution at the first and put that as more important. And if there is a conflict of interest between yourself and also your organization, usually they do expect you to drop your own ones and obey the organization's ones. Then there's another interesting one, which is very strange. And especially for the British people, they think the Chinese prefer not to tackle things directly. And because of that, there were lots of arguments and there were lots of things were saying the Chinese don't follow the rules. But this is the case in the face value. However, if you look at the deep down reasons why the Chinese are actually work on this, it's simply because they're trying to work out a third way and to find a third measure to tackle certain problems. And this is the example I use. And let's say this Chinese company trying to persuade British people to work, overtime, and they tried very hard to tackle the things directly. However, they finally came up with a solution and provide free breakfast and a free dinner. So because you're providing free breakfast and free dinner, and most of the people would come here early to enjoy the free breakfast, and then they wanted to have the free dinner, and then they tend to stay late. So this is the third way of doing things. And then there was another thing, and most of the Chinese, you can see we have the objects and activities, and also we have activities, objects, which one you put the first, which is the second, and which one is more important. Sometimes they tended to have different views, and sometimes actually they do tend to have some sort of disagreements in many cases. And if you're talking about the project level, the project management methodologies, I think the Chinese are building agile kind of activities, behavior. And if you follow PM Boko Prince 2, you can see those are more rigid measures to tackle projects. And this is the summary. And I would say the Chinese, and in overall, we tend to have a greater degree of flexibility. And it's not only in the culture, but also in the system. They do allow you to have certain more freedom. Under the British one, I think it's in the overall, you have less freedom, it's more rigid. Thank you. I rushed through, and thank you all. I'll pass it back.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Chen Tang. And now the next presentation will be done by Professor Chung-Wai So, who is Deputy Executive Director of Research at the Shanghai International Studies University. Professor, please.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm very glad to be invited by Professor Silvia Castina to attend this webinar. Today, my topic will be the creation and development of Eastern management. I will discuss my points from 5 perspectives, including 吉庆，你把那个 PPT 把它放上来Thank you. From my perspective, including source of theory 第二章翻到第二章翻到第二章 OK and the research achievements theory the theory frameworks and the model values and future research directions well now I invite my colleague Association Professor Zhu Qiqing for detailed presentation please 这个朱其清吉庆你要么接下来帮我陈述
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, professors. And I will explain the 5 parts of the Eastern management in detail. First, as for the source of the theory, Eastern management studies is deeply rooted in the management culture of Eastern nations, integrates the wisdom of people in the Eastern and Western countries. First, in the 1970s and 1980s, due to the rise of the Japanese economy, some scholars have begun to pay attention to the management thoughts and activities of Eastern countries. For example, Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, and etc. Such as Theory Z, published by William Oche, an American management scientist. Secondly, many Japanese scholars point out that traditional Chinese thoughts, Confucianism and Taoism, have profound influence on Japanese entrepreneurs, giving them wisdom and motivation. And in the late 1970s, some Chinese scholars, such as Professor Su Dongshui of Fudan University, have begun to explore Chinese management wisdom from ancient Chinese management thoughts. And in recent years, Chinese management, Eastern management studies have achieved many research achievements. First, a research community has been formed. That is, Eastern management research centers and institutes have been established in 15 universities and institutions across the country in China. And a new system has been established, namely the Eastern management theory system of 3 Xue, 3 Wei, 4 Zhi, 5 Xin, and 3 He. And I will explain these terms later in detail. And a new discipline has been created, establish a multi-level discipline training system for undergraduate, master, and doctor of Eastern management. And fourth, new forums were held. And the World Management Forum and the Eastern Management Forum were held 25 times from 1997 to 2021. And a number of outstanding talents have been trained who have applied Eastern management ideas into practice and have become outstanding government officials, business managers, and well-known scholars. And a series of achievements have been formed, including 5 national key social science topics, 23 conference proceedings, and more than 200 monographs and teaching materials, and more than 3,000 published papers. And these are some examples of research achievements in Eastern management. For example, Chinese management in general, and Eastern management, managerial psychology. And this chart is a theoretical framework in Eastern management field. And I will explain later of this framework. First, it is the it is a blend of Eastern and Western wisdom. And that is the Eastern management comes from three fundamental studies. We call it 3学. First is Chinese management, includes Taoism, Confucianism, legalism, Buddhism, military strategies, and so on. And also Western management, including scientific management theory, behavioral management theory, decision theory school, contingency theory, and so on. And also from overseas Chinese management, the integration of traditional Chinese culture, Western management, and the culture of host country of Chinese businessmen. And as for the nature of management, there are three principles of conduct. We call it 3 way. First way, we say putting people first. In Chinese, we say 以人为本. And that means the power to promote comprehensive development of human beings and enhance the quality of their existence. Second way is regarding morality as priority. In Chinese, we say 以德为先, and stresses the significance of ethics and self-discipline as a means to establish leadership. The third way is conducting oneself to serve others. In Chinese, we say 人为为人. That means it is a kind of management behavior proposition that is express democracy, motivation, and service. And as for the philosophy of management, in Eastern management is not just about business. There are 4 levels of governance. We call it 4 zhi. First zhi is state governance. We call it in Chinese 治国. That means enriching and stabilizing the nation, people-based society, conforming to nature, reform and innovation. The second zhi is 治生 in Chinese. That means business governance. And it means making profits by moral means, respecting justice, and practicing benevolence. And third is 治家. That means family governance. It means achieving family prosperity through family harmony. The fourth is 治身, and self-governance, personal self-cultivation, the foundation of personal success. Okay, this is the 4 levels of governance about the theory of philosophy of management. And as for the application of Eastern management philosophy, there are 5 types of managerial practice. We say 5 xing. That is the concrete application of the 3 way and 4 zhi theories in practice. First xing, we say 人道行为 in Chinese. That is human orientation. That means Taoism follows nature. Second xing means psychology-based management. And it means being kind to others. Third is 人缘行为, and it means interpersonal connectedness. There are 5 connection network. And fourth, 人谋行为 in Chinese, and it means strategy, to succeed with strategy. And the fifth, 人才行为, and it means talent development and being good at talent application. And as for the objectives of Eastern management, there are 3 dimensions of harmony we call 3和. First is 人和 in Chinese. means unity, regarding harmony and peace as priority. Second, 和合 in Chinese, integration, and it means competition and cooperation. Third is 和谐, it means harmony, and it means moderation and balance. Okay. There are some practical values in modern area that are brought by Eastern management in the aspects of state governance. And some countries have used the theory to achieve great significance in their state governance. For example, Singapore, former Prime Minister of Singapore's Lee Kuan Yew's Confucian approach to governing the country. And Singapore is a multiracial society with a range of religious beliefs, among which the Chinese population accounts for more than 70%. In 1982, Lee Kuan Yew reinterpreted loyalty, filial piety, benevolence, love, courtesy, righteousness, incorruptible, and shame. In 1991, Singapore's parliament passed the common values. After years of efforts, the core ideas of Confucian ethics have already permeated into all levels of Singaporean society, playing a positive role in advancing the practice of modernization. And as for the business application, I will give you example of Chinese enterprise, Fotel. Fotel also use a Confucian approach to its business. First, the system of all employees as shareholders. It gives all employees some shares according to their position and contributions to the business. Second, the source of innovation is benevolence. And third is the combination of Chinese and Western management, using Chinese ways to control Western skills. And as for self-governance, the example is the Japanese entrepreneur Inamori Kazuo. The management philosophy of Inamori Kazuo is also common to the Eastern management theories. And we can see that the respect of divine and love people, altruism leads to prosperity. And the second is virtuous motives with no selfishness. And so this is the Eastern management is used in the aspects of self-governance. And as for the future research directions, we also put out several suggestions. First, analyze and summarizes the characteristics and rules of Eastern enterprise management activities. Second, to explore the application effect of Western management theory in the context of Eastern culture. And third, research on similarities and differences and the integration of Eastern and Western management thoughts and theories. And all the facts provide the most promising management theories are often produced in rapid development countries and regions. So Eastern management will usher in unprecedented development opportunities. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both Professor Chung Wan Song, Xing. And now I would like to pass the floor to Josep Maria Coll, who is Professor of Strategy, Sustainability and Innovation at EADA Business School, and also visiting professor at Yonsei University of Korea. So he knows very well, actually, I think both systems of management, as Josep Maria has also been living in Korea for some time. Please just.
Thank you so much, Amadeo, and also to the organizers for the invitation to be part of this panel, with also my colleagues and to the rest of the audience for your participation. I will try to share the screen. I prepared to present. I cannot share the screen because I think that still Professor So is sharing it. Okay, so I'm gonna introduce my journey into East and West management system has been one from the West going to the East and learning from Eastern management systems, of course, coming from mental models that were educated in the West. So I did normally the way around, because most people from the East, from the most important companies from the East, they normally go and study MBAs, for example, in the West, especially the US. Since more recently, also in Europe, we have a lot of Asian students also in our universities. But I did the opposite way, the way around in the early 2000s. So I'm going to share my views on some East and West management systems and why a symbiosis can be much helpful for addressing the global challenges that we face as a society. So let me provide some context. So we all know that we are in the ageist century. I mean, we are experiencing an ageist resurgence, because Asia had already coped with the leadership in the world some years ago. So, and it is, really rising, not only in terms of economy, but also in terms of culture and society. But this is happening in a context which we have the Anthropocene on one side. The Anthropocene is the rapid geological changes that we are experiencing in the planet that are a result of human action. And this human action is basically driven by an economic system that is extractive and degenerative by nature. So we trade natural and sometimes human resources for a profit, for a financial profit. So, and this is creating a lot of tensions in the planet, as you may all know, such as climate emergency, rising inequalities, loss of biodiversity, and so on. The other contextual variable I wanted to mention is actually the complexity of the world in which we are living. Sometimes this complexity is called VUCA in the management world. VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I put that N here because I wanted to emphasize that this is increasingly growing exponentially. So the rise of Asia is happening in these two contextual variables, more globalization, more interrelationships, more population in the world. That leads to greater levels of complexity. And we all have experienced complexity since COVID, where most of the values we hold were no longer valid for managing our organizations. And then the third one I wanted to mention is that most international development, including Asian countries' development, is following the catching up. Catching up means that most economic development theories are embedded and embraced by Asian countries trying to progress in order to catch up with the Western counterparts. So most of our economic development theories and also the business management theories that are adopted by most corporations in the world, also in Asia, are originated in the West. And here I'd like to refer to what I call the East-West knowledge gap. So I invite you to do an exercise which is think about, if you have studied economics or business management or even philosophy or in any domain you have studied, think about the theories or conceptual frameworks you studied, where they come from, where did they come from intellectually, from an intellectual point of view. And you may wonder that most of them have originated in the West. This is an exercise. Well, first, of course, I did myself, and I often do with my students. And we can come up with, for example, in terms of business management, the 5 forces of Michael Porter, the business model canvas, the behavioral science, and a lot of the 4 Ps or marketing 4 Ps of Philip Kotler. Most of the theories you have studied are coming from the West, and very few from the East. Some, but still few. So we have an East-West knowledge management gap for different reasons, especially because of the catching up theory I mentioned earlier, and because the globalization was originated following Western management mental models. So my message here is mind the gap. It's a gap I explained in my recent book. Here you have the reference, which is called Buddhist and Taoist Systems Thinking, published 6 months ago. And I'd like to offer my views. This is not exhaustive, of course, because that would deserve a 3-day webinar. But to summarize a comparison between, East and West management systems. So, and here I just put on your left side some components of management in order to make this comparison. So, for example, in terms of philosophy, Eastern management, as my colleagues mentioned, STEM, especially, and I'm talking about Far East, Confucianism and Taoism, while in the West, those philosophical ideas normally come from ancient Greek philosophy. The thinking of in the East is mostly systemic, relational, very emotional, and as it has also been pointing out, my colleague Professor spoke about the 4 levels of governance. For example, we could even increase that level, no, if we include society and the planet, no, beyond the state. And in the West, the thinking mostly is linear, is more reductionistic and more rational, because in the East, the theory of management is more related to the organismic management theory that comes especially from Taoism, this Taoistic approach to nature, to understand that the human being is a small universe that stands between heaven and earth. And the theory underpinning the Western management is more related to scientific management, especially since Frederick Taylor published scientific management in early the 20th century. The agent in Eastern management is mostly the virtuous man. It is that man that puts people first, that stands at the center, and it's also called the superior man. And in the West, the main agent of management is the Homo economicus, which is very much focused on the utility and the material accumulation of capital. The decision-making process in the East is very much determined and conditioned by finding a balance between justice and benevolence and interest, as also was pointed out, while in the West is more focused on profit maximization. The problem solving in the East is about finding a middle way, it's about moderation. It's always finding a middle way between diverging interests that are involved in the problem solving, while in the West is more focused on finding an efficient way of solving problems. Regarding control, in the East, we find more adaptability, a higher degree of freedom and flexibility, and in the West is more focused on prediction, trying to predict, trying to control norms and rules that may enforce this kind of control. And regarding leadership, the East values, especially seniority, is something that you may have seen clearly on the management structures of East Asian organizations. Whereas in the West, the leadership is more focused on meritocracy, so not so much on how all people are and how all have been working in a company. And the network style, the style to do networking in the East is, I put here a term that was coined by a colleague of mine in Korea, Professor Chang, called we, me. So first is about how my actions are going to impact the collective, the group, the team, and that conditions very much how we relate with each other in the East. So first we and then me. Whereas in the West is more me, so it's more a zero-sum game. there's more self-interest first, and then if this can also be beneficial for others, the better. So it's more me, we. So those would be the some characteristics, some traits which are diverging from East and West. Now, if you have here the two different circles, and you see some intersection in the middle of the two circles, right? So those here is that the East, by the theory of catching up, has also, of course, integrated and embedded some traditionally management principles born in the West, like science and technology, research and development and innovation, and the principle of competition. So this has been integrated in order for Chinese and Eastern organizations to catch up. And then here, the last concept I put here is emergence. Emergence is actually the result of putting, in that case, management principles that may be opposite to each other, but that they can interact as they may be interdependent to each other. So emergence is the result, the outcome of putting those opposing principles together. So that creates a convergence, and something new is born out of the collaboration or the cooperation between, in that case, Eastern and Western management styles. And this is the idea of symbiosis. So symbiosis is when you try to put those apparently contradictory elements, principles of management, and you try to combine them. And when you do that, as a result of the interdependent relationship between them, there is a synergy that can be beneficial for management in terms of organizational management and also at other levels. Let me put two examples of that. So one company that already did that was Samsung. Samsung started around 22 years ago, and I had the privilege to collaborate with them on that, the hybrid management system, which was about bringing Western management principles to a mostly Japanese style in managing operations. And the American style was most that was brought into Samsung was mostly focused on bringing strategy principles and also human resource corporate policies into the company. So they set up actually what was called a global strategy department. They recruited global talent from all over the world in marketing, in finance, in design, and IT. They also sent a local talent to study abroad, especially at the United States. And then they also made something which was very interesting for all expats that were going to Korea, which was to make a corporate culture induction training that lasted for 2 or 3 months. And that was quite intense in terms of trying to get to know the local culture, the language, and also the Eastern management principles that prevailed in the culture. They integrated a mix of seniority with meritocracy. They combined those together, so that would be a better fit for the global talent coming to, in that case, South Korea. And they also found a good balance between exploiting internal capacities with exploring external opportunities. And the global talent going to that global strategy department was actually an enabler of that. And the second case I wanted to mention is the dual strategy case by Singapore Airlines. Singapore Airlines is quite a case because I think since 1972, if I recall, they haven't had a profit loss, which is quite unusual, and especially for that competitive market in which they operate. So, and they combine dual strategies. Even Michael Porter said that pursuing dual strategies would be dangerous and quite hard, or in the long run, because they could lead to contradictory organizational tensions. But Singapore Airlines is proving that it can be done, and they have four seemingly paradoxes, but that they are also actually they found a balance between two interdependent components. And one of them is service excellence and cost leadership. So in business schools, we are taught that, or you rather pursue diversification strategies in which service excellence fits, or a cost leadership strategy. So Singapore Airlines has managed to combine both. It also has a pretty interesting mix of combining centralized and decentralized ways of innovating, which is rendering quite important outcomes for them. They are at the same time a technology leader in certain aspects and a follower in other aspects, especially at the back office aspects, and a tech leader regarding the customer relationships. And then they also have a very interesting combination between standardizing some processes while at the same time offering customized and highly personalized services for the customers. So this is quite an interesting case. You have, if you want to know more about these two cases, Harvard Business Review has an interesting article about Samsung published in 2011, and also one published a year earlier regarding Singapore Airlines. So I suggest, if you are interested, that you can check these sources. It's easier to me for Asian companies to integrate Western management principles because they have been exposed to them much more than the way around. So that's one of the particularities. That's why we will find more cases of Asian companies that have, integrated and practiced the symbiosis rather than the way around. And finally, I'd like to share with you some implications for the future of management. And the first here are some fields where you can apply those the symbiotic relationship between Eastern and Western management. In international business, this is obvious. In cross-cultural management, which is a very interesting field in that domain. Regarding management philosophy, research and practice, so principles guide behavior. And in that case, when approaching management through principles, I think it's a very interesting way to do it. In the domain of international relations at political, economic, cultural level, any domain of international relationships, of course, and also in the domain of development cooperation. And especially, I'd like to emphasize the sustainable development. Now we have a new concept since 2015 with the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030, where there are no longer developing countries. All countries are developing countries, since all countries are trying to be less harmful for the planet and trying to become also more positive in creating social and environmental impacts. So those could be some applications and some implications. What should we do in order to try to foster that symbiotic relationship between the East and the West? Well, to me, I think the first one would be closing the gap. So we need more to learn more from the East in order to rebalance and close that gap. So in that case, we need to foster more Western, educated people going to the East to also get an education, to learn there, and also to foster more West-East action research projects. I think these are two fields that definitely should be fostered. The second is building a new international development narrative, because the international development narrative we have now, it's mostly built following a Western narrative. So we should integrate Eastern values also in that international development narrative. And of course, you can enable symbiosis from different points of view. But to me, what is important is to depart from universal values. Universal values are values that you may find them in the East and also in the West. They, of course, you find them in different ways, but the Eastern values that were presented by my colleague, Professor Zhou, those also you will find the counterparts also in the West. So the departure from universal values is what allows us to transcend to go beyond the identity and to find common ground in order to find solutions to those challenges that we are facing today in the Anthropocene. And so, well, you have here, if you are interested in further reading, two books I published. The first one is in Spanish. It's called Zen Business, The Benefits of Applying Harmony in Organizations. And the other one is the recent one I published in English. It's called Buddhism and Taoist Systems Thinking, published by Rowledge. And also here in my website, you have articles about global Oriental management practices, Zen Business, and other Eastern and Western approaches. So, well, thank you so much again. And if you have, of course, questions, answers, or comments, I would be happy to contribute in the Q&A session.
Thank you very much, Professor Coll. Hopefully, we will be presenting your book in March at Casa Asia. So See you at that time. Okay. And now I would like to pass the floor to Fidel Leon Darder, who's Associate Professor of International Business in the Department of Business Strategy at the University of Valencia. Professor Leon Darder, please.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. First, I would like to thank CASA Asia for allowing me to participate in this webinar, and of course, ACEDE, especially Luis Angel and Carmen, for letting me participating as a member of the association, of the Spanish Association of Management. Well, I'm giving a perspective on this issue between the differences between Europe and Asia. Many things I'm going to present have strong similarities with the ones presented before by the other panelists. Maybe I will give a more academic approach using some terms that are common in the academic literature. Well, I have some experience in teaching cross-cultural management for some 15 years right now. And the first issue I would like to focus on is in the fact that when thinking of the differences in the way of doing business in Asia and Europe, in most cases, as José María Coy said before, we always have a Western approach to compare different cultures. In fact, it's very difficult to give a precise description of how business are done here in Europe, because Europe itself is very diverse. We have strong differences between the north and the south of Europe, richer and poorer countries in the continent, small and large size enterprises. But we think that because of this strong cultural diversity within Europe, we are very multicultural and that we are able to understand how others' culture work. And in fact, we think that this is a bit biased because sometimes when thinking of multiculturality, we always have this Eurocentric perspective. And I think it's important contrasting Europe with other continents, especially with Asia, to understand how cultural differences play in the global environment. No? Then in this sense, I'm going to focus on the main cultural dimensions that explain the differences between Europe or West and the East. No? In this sense, I would like to mention that most of the, as José María Coy said before about the management systems and the literature about management, in the case of cross-cultural management, it's quite similar. Most of the models come from the Western tradition, and in fact, before the fall of the Iron Wall, the vision was specifically Western. Then it was with the fall of the Iron Wall, with the end of the Cold War, when Western researchers started to think of enlarging the perspective and including new visions from other regions. And when comparing, they realized that it would be necessary, for example, in Hofstede literature, they conclude that we should include what they call Confucian dynamism in order to include all the variables that were relevant when comparing these two different cultures from a global perspective. Then, in this case, when they thought of Confucian dynamism, they were thinking of the importance of long-term orientation in Asia that was not so evident when analyzing Western business, because in Europe and in the US, in the Western world, we have more short-term orientation. Then they thought that by including this, we were completing the circle of cultural dimensions. But in fact, I think there are some other cultural dimensions included by other cultural frameworks that are very useful to understand the differences between the East and the West. Of course, long-term orientation or time management is one variable that is key. But as mentioned in other presentations, relationship orientation, it's a variable that plays a strong role, not only in Asia, but also in other regions of the world, different from Europe and the US. The role of hierarchy, it's also different in the different regions. And of course, the perspective when addressing problems. In Europe, we have a more specific vision, as some of the previous panelists mentioned. And in Asia in general, they have a more comprehensive, a more holistic approach to not only business, but also to life. I think that all these dimensions could also reflect the Confucian influence, because Confucius has had a strong influence in general, not only in China, but also in other Asian countries. And these variables have strongly influenced by his thoughts. Okay, then I will go with the first dimension, time orientation. In general, in Asia, and particularly in China, business people have, not only business people, but of course also the administrations and the government, they have more long-term perspective and have a more synchronous way of understanding time, which means that for them, the important thing is not the sequence of activities, but the whole picture and the objectives. Then when they think of analyzing a problem, they always have in mind these future consequences of the actions and what they want to achieve for the future. This helps Eastern companies to have clear goals about what they want. And one thing that is very important, and that it's a strong difference with the West, is that this long-term perspective helps companies to make the decisions at the right time and to, for example, I think this is very important when making acquisitions in international business, for example. In most cases, Western companies, they think of the short-term impact on the stock market and on having an impact on the audience and so on, while and sometimes they acquire companies that they don't really fit the needs of the company, or that they are overrated, for example. I'm just giving the example of Geely Auto and Volvo. Everybody knows here in Europe, Volvo Cars. It's a Swedish company that was acquired by Ford Ford Motor Company in the 90s. And just 10 years later, this company was sold to Geely. That time, Geely was a small car producer that had been born just 10, 15 years before. It was supposed that Geely lacked the expertise, the knowledge, the technology, and the resources to have global reach. But step by step, they were growing in the local market, and they accumulated the resources to go global. In this sense, they lacked most of the traditional French-specific assets we consider multinational companies need to go global. But in this case, they were very wise in programming their long-term activities. And one key fact in their development was the acquisition of Volvo from Ford. Geely bought Volvo from Ford for a third or a fifth of the cost Volvo had paid 10 years earlier. Okay, why? Because maybe Ford acquired this company thinking of the immediate needs of the company, while Geely was thinking of the long-term perspective. They were thinking of what assets, what was the value Volvo could contribute to the competitive advantage of the company. And also, Geely was very respectful of the assets they were acquiring. This is something that I will comment in the next slide. Another issue that also my colleagues in the presentation have mentioned, it's the importance of relationships in Asia. Here we, with our Western perspective, have a very limited perception of what relationships mean in Eastern world. Okay, developing relationships in Eastern companies, it's something necessary in order to build trust, because as other panelists mentioned, trust is the key variable in developing business relationships. And in this sense, my perception is that because of this need of relationships, doing business with Eastern companies poses strong barriers to Western companies. But at the same time, it's true that Eastern companies are aware of these differences, and they are more willing to facilitate access to their business systems and to work with them than we Western people do. No? Then in this sense, it's very important to understand how Wanchi works, this relationship system in China. Also, the importance of the indirect language. Professor Changui mentioned this, and also Professor Yangshu mentioned how important it is understanding the same thing about the same statement. Okay, in Europe we are, or in Western countries in general, we are very direct. What we say is what we mean. Is just this. If we say this, this means just this. While in Eastern companies, saying no can be considered as sign of disrespect, or it can be considered very arrogant. It could damage harmony, and then they avoid saying no. Then we need to understand when they say yes, that this could mean yes or no, and that if they say yes and in fact it was no, it's not because they are trying to cheat us or that they are dishonest. We need to understand that they did this because they want to keep harmony and they want to develop relationships and have a good climate in the relationships. Then, in this sense, this relationship orientation has been very useful to the internationalization of Eastern companies, especially Chinese companies, because these companies use previous contacts in the different countries where other Chinese citizens or institutions have been working in the past, and this helps to break the barriers to foreign markets. It's also true that this internationalization is far away from following the traditional sequential process, and it's more contact-driven internationalization. Okay. Another dimension where East and West differ is in the role of hierarchy. No, it's considered that Eastern societies are more authoritarian, and in this sense that leadership styles could be more authoritarian. The superiors are used to give orders and the subordinates to obey. And it's supposed that in Europe, we have a more participate leadership. Managers at any hierarchical level can make their own decisions without consulting the superiors. But I think that sometimes this puts Western companies in some kind of disadvantages, because the fact that Eastern companies have paternalistic leadership styles, this doesn't mean that information doesn't flow. My perception is that Eastern, especially Chinese managers, have a broader vertical scope. This means that they make decisions at their level, but they are more involved in the implementation, and they have a close contact to the subordinates when implementing their decisions. Also, this, as Mr. Changui, Professor Changui mentioned, he spoke about these different levels of governance. It's very important to take into account that relationships not only apply at company level, or hierarchy is not only implemented at company level, but it also applies to the relationships, to the intercompany relationships, and in the relationships with the government. Okay, then in this sense, when multinational Chinese companies go abroad, they are always supported by the government, even if they are not state-owned companies. In China, there is a strong divide between state-owned companies that are traditionally more conservative. Most of them have developed thanks to the support of Western companies to this joint venture, but the government has been able to allow the emergence of a myriad of independent private companies that are more entrepreneurial, much less risk-averse, and that complement the strategy of the state-owned companies. And here, just one example of one Chinese company. I visited this factory in Uruguay, and then I visited 1 year later another factory from the same manufacturer in Russia. And in the interviews with the employees, they told me that for Western people, it was very difficult to understand how fast Chinese were in implementing the policies. And in part, they thought it was because of this permeability between the different hierarchical levels, how the engineers and the managers were involved in the operations of their subordinates. To them, it was very, very important. And another dimension that I think that it's key in understanding the differences between the East and the West is that this holistic versus specific vision of the world. When we in the West analyze problems, we pay attention to the specific details. We analyze the different aspects of the problem in an isolated way. While in Eastern societies, they look at the whole picture and to the interaction between the different elements of the problem or of the system. This has made possible that Chinese companies departing from what, from the Western perspective, could be weak firm specific advantages or firm specific assets, have been able to develop them by focusing on the aspects of this big picture that had been disregarded by the Western companies. It's also true that these companies, because of this global vision, tend to be more vertically integrated, because this allows companies to give an integrated answer to the problems they have. No? Then in this sense, we are witnessing the last years how Chinese companies are specifically good in combining different technologies coming from different areas, and they put them together, giving new solutions to all problems just because they have a broader vision of the problem. And finally, because I think the aim of this seminar is not only comparing the different managerial approaches from West and East, but also thinking of the convergence and the future. No? And I think that it's one key fact in the current business world that it's going to facilitate the coordination or the integration between the different systems. Traditionally, these Western theories, this Western management system we have been talking about, have been designed from the male perspective, and women have had a very limited participation in business, and to some extent still like this. But thankfully, in the last years in Europe, many countries, the participation of women in management it's been increasing, but also in China. And I think this is particularly relevant because the Chinese society is traditionally very paternalistic, and the role of women in society has been very, very limited. Even it has this Confucian origins, no? And if you look at the composition of the Central Committee of the Communist Party in China, less than 10% of members are women. But the Chinese government and the Chinese law recognizes gender equality, and the participation of women in business is increasing. And I think it's also very important to mention the impact that the single child policy has had in this aspect in China, no? Because the role of women in the traditional family was very subordinated to men, and thanks to this single child policy, many families in China have just one child, and this is a woman, and then all the efforts of the family focus on raising and educating these women, and this has made that the education level and the participation of women in business has increased. And I think this is important because traditionally the manager's profile is different when it comes to gender differences. Women are more inclined to support diversity. They are more interested in intercultural encounters and in fostering diplomacy. And I think this approach can be useful to align the perspectives from Western and Eastern ways of doing business. No? Well, that's all. Thank you to everybody. Muchas gracias for your attention. And of course, you can, all your questions are welcome. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Professor Leon Darder. And thank you for all the panelists. I think it's been a fairly interesting session with different point of views, also with some common actually approaches to all of you. And now I think we have a lot of questions. That's the problem. And I don't know whether we will be able, to because we only have just 10 to 15 minutes. But I will answer. I will start with one question for Professor In-Chan Tang. And it's about risk avoidance, because actually in, some of the Asian countries like Japan, for instance, we are just looking at risk avoidance as one of the practical issues of the country. So basically managers doesn't want to take risks, but it doesn't seem that actually the Chinese case is the same. For instance, if you're just on the slide about about the COVID-19 reaction, we have seen that actually the Chinese have just take more risk than the UK, and I'm seeing also that actually the Chinese companies are taking a lot of risks in actually launching products to the market. What are your views on that, please?
Thank you for the question. And it's very interesting, very good and interesting question as well. And I've been in this kind of research for quite a while with a couple of my PhD students in relation to risk avoidance. And it depends on where you to look at the risk. If you look at the risk at the strategic level, very high level, decision level, the strategies, either at the national, regional, or enterprise level. And I believe the Chinese are really focusing on the main aim. And when the aim is focused, and they ignore the risks. When I say ignore the risks, they don't actually pay too much attention on the risks, as long as they believe that's the right direction they are going. So for COVID, for the takeover, and I think, Federal, you mentioned Chile and Volvo, for quite a lot of these things, because they don't have the time to go through all the details, and then they think strategically it is suitable, they just do it. However, the Chinese are very careful at the action level. So when you're actually working on particular project, when you're actually looking the way of delivering things at the bottom level of the management, and they do tend to be very careful, and they tend to avoid or whatever the risks. However, for those risks, we still need to separate them into different sections. One category is the risk related to human. Another risk is related to actual task completion. So if the risk is related to human, let's say personal relationship, they are trying to avoid it. They're being very sensible, very careful on these particular risks. However, on the risks of delivering particular tasks, they are actually tend to be more careless in a way. However, still less risk-taking. So the Chinese famous phrase is actually using the middle path. And the Chinese word is either 中庸 or 和, and that is always focusing on not taking extreme measures. So you can see the risk-taking in one level is very, very prompt, and in another level, sometimes they tend to be very timid. It all depends on which kind of risk we're dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Also, there's another question for you. I will read the question with respect to culture. I think it was number 7. Has the impact of the pandemic shifted the equilibrium point farther away in between the British and the Chinese? I don't know whether you understand the question. If
when you say the equilibrium, is the equilibrium on what?
Of equilibrium point of mutual. I don't understand very well the question. Also, well, anyway, just I think it's asking whether actually, well, if the pandemic has had an influence, actually.
Oh, I see. Yeah. And I think that the COVID pandemic has, at the beginning, was quite a negative impact towards the Chinese culture and Chinese society, and it's simply because it started from China, and also with the accusation from America saying is the Chinese even invented the virus. But however, because the Chinese government started to take this very aggressive measure from the beginning, and by taking a huge risk to combat this COVID, and eventually it turned out to be at least it's been supported by the Chinese people, and this is all down to the cultural social foundation for Chinese people, the Chinese culture, because the Chinese is usually or is always by culture putting people on the top of everything. So sometimes they even wanted to sacrifice the economy, the production, but they really wanted to put their people's life first. And that is one of the decisions, because that, I think, has the support from the Chinese people. On the other hand, I believe the current situation with the Chinese culture, I think it would be impacted by the COVID. And the COVID, in many cases, is in the sense it strengthened the belief of these advantages in a way how to govern the government for the Chinese, rather than actually weakened it.
Thank you. Actually, we have also a question for Professor Coy. Well, this is a multiple question, so from Xavier Castañer. Well, the first part of the question is, which would be the most valued virtues in the East? The most valued virtues in the East. And also, is the West mostly concerned with efficiency or with effectiveness? And also, there's a third question. Are both systems interested in quantitative growth rather than qualitative development?
Well,
so it's a multiple question. But,
yes, and all would deserve a lot of time, no?
Okay, just we don't have that much time, so please.
I'd like to provide. Well, to me, the most valued virtues traditionally, and that was presented in the frame of the Oriental modern management system. It's about benevolence, also service to others, and morality. This stands as some fundamental Confucian values. But of course, they've been interpreted in such a different way since China has also had to catch up with the rest. So you can find a mixture of those virtues mixed with pressures such as the collectivism of the Winnie principle, and also Mianzi, which is not losing face, which is so much conditioning the way those virtues are interpreted. Regarding the second, of course, I think effectiveness is also present, but also in the Chinese Eastern management system. So effectiveness is about achieving the results, no, the objectives that you have, but the ways to do it, they differ, as we already mentioned, no. But in terms of process management, because this is something that was very much ingrained after scientific management was published by Frederick Taylor, and they entered the metaphor of the organization as a machine. I think that efficiency is actually the one of the main features to me in Western management. And both systems, I think they are in, both systems are, especially the Western one, in terms, when we talk about business, it's more interested in quantitative growth. This has been embedded by also the Eastern management system, as it has to catch up. We only have to look at the main measure we have at the state level to measure success is the GDP. So it's a quantitative system, and in companies is actually the P&L or the level of turnover of the EBITDA that companies have. But they are getting more and more interested in qualitative development, since quantitative development is not enough for addressing the global challenges, as we have seen. That would be my intake, very briefly.
Great. Also, there's a question for all of the panelists, and I think it's an interesting question. And it's saying that one of the critics made to the Western-oriented management research has been considered Western management as homogeneous. It's coming mainly from the US and expanding this US to the rest of the countries. And the question is about Eastern, actually, management system. Are there common patterns, or actually how diverse are Eastern cultures from a managerial point of view? And that would be the question for each one of you who wants to answer.
I think that this question has, to some extent, answered by Professor Tang. I think the main difference, no, I think it was Professor Coy who answered this. I think the main difference is about uncertainty avoidance. I think that Japanese culture, it's among the most uncertainty avoidant, the most risk averse in the world, and the management systems and the way companies relate to each other in Japan is very influenced by this. These long-term intercompany relationships, this decision-making system. When in one Japanese company you want to make a decision, you need to share this with your colleagues at your organizational level. You receive feedback from them because they are always thinking of avoiding any mistake, and this concern for quality is very important in Japan. While South Korea is less risk averse in this sense, and China is just the opposite, as my colleagues mentioned. It's much more entrepreneurial in this sense, and much less risk averse. Maybe this would be the main difference from my point of view.
I don't think there's any one of you would like to comment something more, or?
Yeah, I'd like to just add a few comments on Federal's part. And I think in principle, by theory, or the very fundamental things, the Chinese really praise the idea of agility. And if you look at the whole management system, it's all based on the agility. The agility means adaptation, and also whatever you think the opportunity is there, and then you use certain way to do things. It's either fixed methodology or is a more relaxed methodology. Whatever it is, it's all based on the context. And also there's another one what the Chinese is actually trying to think. I'm focusing on Chinese because I think I can see clearly the Japanese and some of the Eastern Asian countries, they tended to move slightly apart, simply because the Chinese culture, especially in the recent China, has more influence. All the Chinese are more adaptive to the scientific way of management principles. So actually the other thing is the Chinese is really, really human focused, because it's human focused, and you can see the decision-making process is more actually trying to understand the differences of different requirements from different people. And in this sense, the homogeneous kind of management system is being modified So the real thing is, I like the phrase what Professor Paul just used is symbiosis, and the Chinese is really trying to work out a symbiotic way to link the technologies and the methodologies has been developed based on the scientific system and using and the human side of these Chinese ancient philosophies like Taoism and also the Confucianism. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, there's another question, probably for Professor Win Shantang or for any one of you, or Professor Chung Wan So also. And it's how different is speed. Speed, we're talking about speed, okay, between British and Chinese culture. Or we can also extrapolate it to Western and Eastern cultures. How fast is fast for the British, how fast is fast for the Chinese. There's one expression in Chinese, which is 越快越好. So basically, you need to do things fast. But what's your point or your views on that?
苏教授，你来，我可以帮你翻译。So I would just propose Professor So can answer this question. I can translate for him if needed.
就是越快越好，是吧？
Yeah.
就是，但我不知道，就是它这个速度，是指经济发展的速度，还是各方面发展的速度？
各方面发展的，就是中国人思维逻辑，中国人的思维逻辑是越快越好嘛？
就是他们是怎么看的，是吧？
对，
说，就是他是想问的是，就是说，我们中国人的想法，还是怎么？
中国人的想法
就是，那么我在想，就是对于我们中国人讲，因为原来我们就是这个起点因为比较低吧，就是说，这40年改革开放以来，这个40几年，就是一直想的是，肯定是想这个发展越快越好。那么经过这个40多年的一个发展呢，就是说我们想，现在原来从数量现在就是开始考虑到质量的问题了，就是说。原来没有就是一种这个可持续发展这种想法，现在慢慢也是考虑到这个要有可持续性。那么我想就是说，随着这个数量的增多，我们想这个质量会以后呢，就是说我们讲这个质量会慢慢的就是说更加会我们是更加考虑的这样一个范畴啊。
Okay, I'll translate. What Professor just mentioned, because China started very low from the last, let's say the beginning of the 40 years ago after the new China has been formed, because we started very low, and also there was a catching up game. The China need to develop really fast to catch up the development of the Western part of the world. And after China has done the fast development, and now we're reaching the time we need to focus on the quality. And we tended to abolish the idea of the faster the better. And at the moment, the Chinese is really focusing on going up a different ladder and focus on the quality part.
那么我在想，就是说，现在也是无论从这个经济啊，还是生活啊，还是教育方面啊，那么更多的就是说，我想，很多的就是在方方面面呢，我们也更加在考虑这个我们讲的这个如何来平衡的问题啊，就说比如说平衡你这个工作跟生活的问题啊。那么另外一方面就是说，我们也在想，就是也考虑到就是以后能够更可持续的一种发展的问题。
Currently, if talking about the sense of economy, culture, and education, and the Chinese now is really paying more attention on sustainable developments, and but not trying to take extreme measures.
Okay. Another question. I think we are just going to end up very, very shortly, but just another question more. Can we say that the Asian management style has evolved to manage their companies in a more Western way, but with their values?
I think probably I'll answer this question. Sorry. And I use Huawei as an example. And I think Huawei, when they started, And Huawei was famously using the phrase of behaving like a wolf kind of behavior. So it tends to be very aggressive on the development, especially in the economic sense, a financial sense. So that's the very early days when Huawei started. That's in the 1980s. And very quickly, when Huawei started to grow on size, and Huawei started to realize they need methodologies to support the massive size of the company. So what they did was they actually borrowed the American system. And they used the phrase of wearing the American shoe, but walking on the Chinese road. So you can see they really adopt the Western management system 100%. However, they're using them to manage Huawei's own practices. Soon after that, and Huawei started to realize there were issues because although there was a Western methodology, but if it is used by Chinese people, they always add a Chinese characteristics. Because the Chinese characteristics been added, and then they created a new philosophy. And this, I believe, probably can lead into a new kind of theory. And they call it manage greenness. Because managing greenness is really the introduction of a freedom into the management system. Virtually, they believe the American system is too rigid because it's too rigid, and they really wanted to introduce a slightly more degree of freedom. And they started to trial this in their HR departments. And also they started to actually expand this into other management practices, such as introduction. And this is the place where they met problems. When they met problems, they realized the degree of freedom, if you use it to actually manage their production, and the Western method and the Chinese culture, they don't mix. The symbiosis won't actually create at this point. Now that's why they started to move this away, making this managing in greenness in version 2. And suddenly realize the management greenness is really suitable for the high level, strategic level of management. And with the production practices, processes, and they are going to focus on the Western management practices. So you can see there is a mixture of the Chinese on the strategy and the mixture of Western or American management in the delivery of tasks. And then is the cultural side in the middle, where that is really the challenge is. And that's the place that I would say that would reflect what Professor Cole's idea of symbiosis.
Thank you very much. I think we have just many questions still in the pipeline, but unfortunately, actually, just time run up, and I think we will be able actually to. But I think it will be a good idea just to hold another again this kind of session in order to to get into deep more into just management between the East and the in the West, and also to answer the questions that we didn't have time to answer today. So I don't know, Xavier, if you would like to say something, just to say goodbye to our.
Thank you so much, Amadeo. Just to say a big thank you to the panelists. I think it was a fabulous set of presentations, which had some, as you pointed out, convergent views, but also some different points and from different parts of Asia, I guess, and also this very important point about the diversity in the West, so that there is so much more to discuss. And thank you also to all the participants for the questions, and of course to you, Amadeo, and Casa Asia once more for organizing this magnificent event. Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you to everybody, and see you again. Okay, bye-bye. And thank you.
Thank you very much. See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.